The Israeli Supreme Court is at war with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing bloc of supporters. One of Israel's Supreme Court justices has received a death threat that is blamed on Netanyahu for inciting such hatred of the court because its policies go counter to Netanyahu's goals and wishes. The Israeli judiciary has linked a threatening letter against a Supreme Court judge to continuous unbridled incitement against the courts in a firm, thinly veiled criticism of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his allies. Just recently, Justice Anit Baron, a liberal-leaning judge who supported many rulings that have angered Netanyahu's right-wing base, received an explicit death threat. Israeli justices have said that the threat to the Supreme Court justice is a direct result of the incitement coming from Netanyahu. This is on him. Netanyahu, who is charged with corruption in 3 cases, has repeatedly alleged that the courts, police, his political rivals, the media, and state prosecutors had all conspired to frame him for crimes he didn't commit. Immediately prior to the start of his trial last month, Netanyahu ripped into police and prosecutors, insinuating a broad conspiracy to bring him down and declaring that all his right-wing supporters were on trial along with him. Netanyahu alleges that there is a conspiracy against him with a goal to oust him as a right-wing prime minister and to banish the right-wing camp from leadership of Israel for years to come. Who are these conspirators against him? According to him, it's elements in the police and state attorney's office band together with left-wing journalists and the judiciary. So how tense is the political situation in Israel right now? How vulnerable is the Israeli Supreme Court?
You know, the Israeli political system has a flaw in it, and that is that there's no checks and balances between the executive and the legislative and the judicial. So that you have a Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has actually been fairly liberal. I mean, it's Zionist. It hasn't stopped the occupation, house demolitions, or anything, but it's been fairly liberal, and it limits the government to some degree. But you have a situation where a majority of the parliament can pass laws that overrule the Supreme Court because Israel doesn't have a constitution. And that's a problem. So far, actually, the people and most of the people in the parliament have protected the Supreme Court. But there's been an attack by Netanyahu and by the people that support him, mainly in terms of his criminal trial, that are trying to undermine the legitimacy of this, and not just the Supreme Court, but the whole court system. There's quite a bit of tension, but we have to remember that Netanyahu's party did not get a majority in the Knesset, in the parliament. In other words, it's a coalition government with this blue-white party of Benny Gantz. And Benny Gantz and his party actually have control of the Ministry of Justice. So they're able to protect the court system. Now, this is a tremendous source of tension between Gantz and Netanyahu, of course. And it could very well be that we'll have early elections because it's getting to be very, very tense personally and politically between those two people and those two parties. But so far, actually, Gantz and his party have been able to protect the judicial system, and so, you know, the attack of the judicial system is mainly from a small cadre of people around Netanyahu, but it hasn't gotten popular. Among the Israeli public. It doesn't have a lot of political support. And actually, I think Israel's institutions are fairly strong. So Netanyahu and his camp, which doesn't include the whole Likud, but a core of the Likud, is not succeeding, I think, in undermining the judicial system or even making Netanyahu especially sympathetic in public opinion. People really don't like him, and people are not against his being tried.
According to an exclusive report in Israel Channel 13, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war on the judges. Apparently, the network, citing a secret source, has said that if anyone is hurt, it is Netanyahu's responsibility. The timing of the death threat was the most troublesome. It came less than 2 days after the Supreme Court rejected a legislation that would legalize about 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. This goes directly against Netanyahu's annexation plans and his right-wing ideological goals of annexing all of Palestine. The right wing, led by Netanyahu, believes that the judiciary system, along with other institutions, is run by the left wing.
The vast majority of the Jewish citizens do support right-wing ideology. The left is barely existed in Israel, and in fact the only true left party is the Arab United List. So what we tend to call a political deadlock is really a personal dispute between Netanyahu and his former allies such as Lapid and Lieberman. It's not really a political dispute. They agree on most fundamental things, and this is why Netanyahu ended up with a pretty solid unity government, and it can even get bigger.
They believe the court stripped Israeli law of any inherent meaning and created complete legal mayhem. There are no truths, no absolute values, no clear-cut legal precedents. They believe the decisions made by the court are skewed in favor of the liberal side of the political spectrum. And now the right wing is pushing a Netanyahu-backed law that aims to legislate limits on the court's reach or enable Prime Minister to enact an override provision. How does the views of the right wing reflect on the current policies of the regime?
I'm very happy for the Israelis that they found their right political outlets to release their political anger, but these protests are not going to change anything because the vast majority of the Israeli Jews do believe in nationalist and racist philosophy, and Netanyahu's policies reflects those views.
The Israeli Supreme Court and the judiciary in Israel have both threatened to block any attempts by Netanyahu and his right wing to bypass Supreme Court. Certainly, this will already add more flame to the fire in an unprecedented spat between the Israeli regime and the judiciary. All of these new developments come after a unity was struck between Israeli Prime Minister and his political opponent Benny Gantz.
We have a good reason to believe that Kahol Lavan, blue and white, Gantz's party is pretty much a dead entity, and their only chance of political survival is to be there, subservient to Netanyahu. And I tend to believe that Gantz will stay there until he realizes that this rotation is not going to happen. He's not going to become a prime minister.
A new study reveals that more Israelis, in fact, oppose annexation of the occupied West Bank than actually support the plan. Over 400 Israeli professors have signed a petition calling such plans a crime against humanity. Even Israel's Supreme Court struck down a law that had retroactively legalized about 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, I think that the unrest that we see in Israel at large is not really genuine, because most Israelis, I mean Jewish Israelis, do believe in the ideas and in the philosophy that Netanyahu adheres to. However, there is something that we have to understand. Israel wasn't born, Zionism, so to say, wasn't born as the concept that we see it now as a Jewish state. In fact, Zionism was an attempt to defy the idea of a Jewish diaspora identity, the shtetl, the ghetto, the exclusiveness. It was a promise to civilize the Jewish identity in what they call their national homeland. This is obviously open to debate. I don't believe that the land of Palestine is the Jewish land, and so on and so on. However, it has become clear that Netanyahu at a certain stage understood that the unifier, the true unifier of the Israeli Jews is Jewishness rather than Zionism or Israeliness. And he started to push the country into this idea of Jewish unifier, Jewish state. What we see now is the last attempt by his opponents to reclaim the Israeliness of the state, which defies the idea of Jewishness, and they are encountered with a very strong, unified political front that adhere to Netanyahu's concept of Jewish state.
How does this impact the average Israeli? Does the average Israeli want annexation? Do they think that Tel Aviv will actually annex occupied Palestinian territories?
Obviously, I am against the annexion of the West Bank, and especially now for the Jordan Valley, which is supposed to be on the 1st of July.
אני חושב שאתה יודע, כשאני מסתכל על ישראל כיום, עם משבר פוליטי החמור בתולדותיה, משבר בריאותי עולמי, משבר כלכלי שלהערכתי אנחנו עוד לא מבינים את מלוא המשמעויות שלו. ובמציאות הזאת אנחנו הולכים עכשיו ורוצים לספח צעד שהוא בעיקרון בעל פוטנציאל הרסני, מזיק, איני רואה בו שום תועלת, ואז אתה שואל את עצמך כאזרח במדינה הזאת, אפילו לא כחבר כנסת, מי צריך?
I'm not thinking of the Palestinians right now. Human rights is fine, but this is not the issue in this case. It's absolutely against the interest of the state of Israel, of the Jewish state, of the Israelis.
Our message is that we want to keep Israel as a Jewish and a democratic state, and we don't want a binational state. We want Israel to keep on being a Jewish and a democratic state. And if we promote the annexation, so we will have here one state for two people. That's our first message. And our second message is under an economic crisis with more than 1 million people that are unemployed, we cannot do annexation. The tons of dozens of billions of shekels needs to go to the regular people and not for annexation.
We're here to specifically oppose annexation, support a two-state solution, equal rights for Palestinians as well. and to support a democratic process.
I came here tonight to demonstrate against annexations. Two of my sons are in the army right now. They're doing their service, and I'm really afraid of the consequences of the annexation, of starting a big war here. So I'm coming to do my part, to do a little bit against this chaos.
Israeli citizens have clearly showed that they are against the annexation of more Palestinian territories. A poll by the Geneva Initiative found that 41.7% of the public oppose annexation, while 32.2% support it. The survey found that even among backers of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party, only half support annexation.
Well, let's hope that Benny Gantz party and part of the government will win between both of them, and the part of his government will not accept this annexation of the Palestinian land, and let's hope that the option of Benny Gantz will be an option like was with Isaac Rabin and with Shimon Peres, to make a real peace with the Palestinians and give them their own state that they are waiting so many years.
Israeli citizens are worried that the move by the regime can further isolate them in the international community. Much of the international community has already expressed strong opposition to the move. The United Nations, European Union, UK, Germany, France, just about all countries in Western Asia, and now liberal, left-wing, and anti-Zionist organizations and institutions are calling for Israel to withdraw from its plans and withdraw from those territories it wants to annex.
I think it's the Israeli leadership just trying to entrench their hold on all of Palestine. They want maximum land with minimum people. So they're trying to take all the land that doesn't have very dense Palestinian population. Well, the annexation plan is completely immoral and illegal. And actually, it's a continuation of what Israel has been doing since the very beginning, of taking Palestinian land, getting the Palestinian people off of it, and really like destroying their lives. So in a way, it's nothing new. I think he's just using the opportunity of the Trump administration to further entrench what Israel's been doing for more than 70 years. And I know that most Jewish people oppose it. Many oppose it because it's fundamentally wrong to steal other people's land. That's wrong. Some Jewish people oppose it because they're afraid it'll make Israel actually less secure, less accepted in the world, and their first concern is about maintaining Israel. That's, I don't think that's the most important thing. The most important thing is really the suffering of the Palestinian people. And then there are some people who support it. But myself and people like me are very actively opposed. And there are many Israelis who are opposed as well.
On social media, the issue of annexation created a buzz. According to Scaloni from Israel, the annexation is something that Bibi conceived and stitched specially for Handel and Hauser, which is what convinced them not to allow Gantz to form a regime and not to allow legislation against Netanyahu. The promise of annexation is what saved Netanyahu and dismantled the blue and white. Netanyahu needs the annexation only for real state purposes. According to Kenneth Roth, the Israeli regime annexing the war crime settlement settlements gradually doesn't make it any more acceptable than annexing them all at once. A war crime is a war crime. Ziad says that it is well worth noting here that the whole war crime process is mostly funded by U.S. taxpayers and supported by U.S. administrations. Lamb Stanley proposes that Israel was established as a white colony to oversee Western interests in the Middle East, while shifting an indigenous to Europe religious minority onto someone else. Furthermore, according to him, Europe needs to confront its Jew hatred, instead of trying to claim European Jews are Semites who don't belong.
What can we do to try to stop it? And also, it's not just stop the annexation. We have to go beyond that, because Israel has occupied the West Bank and enforced a military regime, a hostile foreign military regime, for more than 53 years. And before that, going all the way back to 1947, 1948. Zionists have taken land from Palestinians, destroyed their villages, killed them, right? So stopping the annexation is not really like the goal that we have to work for. We have to go beyond that. The annexation is just one more step of making things even worse. And the people who talk to me are looking for what can we do to have any influence on the outcomes there. So we can see the last few weeks, the Netanyahu government is backing down. You know, they're like, oh, they're delaying, they're changing the scope of the annexation. They're doing that only because of the opposition that they're getting, right? In the United States Congress, something like 190 Democratic members of Congress signed a letter. Something like 30 US senators have signed a letter. Many Jewish organizations in the United States and other places are opposing, right? So I'm making a point that this opposition is effective. It's had an effect. We can see that already. So that's a signal to us to just keep it up and keep doing it. That's it.
Some 400 Jewish studies professors have signed an open letter condemning Israel's plans to apply its sovereignty onto the occupied Palestinian territories. The statement argues that the move would cement into place an anti-democratic system of separate and unequal law, essentially calling it apartheid and colonial. The annexation, the letter argues, will result in a system where small Palestinian enclaves in the annexed territories are effectively controlled by Israel, in what it admits will amount to conditions of apartheid.
We cannot say now that it will be effective or not, because it is like an experiment that they are doing over there. But once in 1980 they tried to do the same coalition between the Prime Minister Isaac Shamir and Shimon Peres. So they divided the term 2 years each. Now they want us to do the same thing, and we don't know if it will have a success. With Netanyahu in front of the government, I am not optimistic, because he is an extremist right-wing person, and he is allied with Trump policies, and that is an extreme Zionist view of Palestine, and they really don't want to make peace with the Palestinians and with the whole Middle East and with the world.
Thousands of Israelis have been demonstrating in Tel Aviv against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to annex occupied Jerusalem, Al-Quds, the occupied Jordan Valley, and illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. Israelis in general worry that outside of Israel, the impact of annexation will be a destructive intensification of political polarization, hatred, and mutual recrimination. Israelis at the protest said that they would leave Israel if Netanyahu does annex Palestinian lands.